High-ranking Congressman, Michigan's Dan Kildee, Chief Deputy Whip and member of the Ways and Means Committee, and California's Khanna, who sits on the House Oversight Committee. Let me go to you first, Congressman Kildee. What should the Democrats' response be to now this putting on brakes by Attorney General Barr that he may not testify on this Thursday?
Well, first of all, I don't think the president has these choices. I mean, he has obviously his own version of the truth. He invents facts whenever he'd like, but he doesn't have the right to his own version of the Constitution. We have an oversight responsibility. We have a check on the presidency. That's not just because we want to. That's because that's the design of our system of government. We have a balance of powers, and he can't decide because it gets uncomfortable, or maybe we're getting too close to some of the truths that he's trying to protect the American people from learning about, that he's not going to have the kind of scrutiny that the Constitution, that the framers of this Constitution demand that we place on him. He's gone far too far. He's going to have to submit to these questions. And the one message that I would give to President Trump, the truth is going to come out. It is going to come out.
Congressman Khanna, the fact that we are framed by the Constitution with co-equal three branches of government, if the president and those that he's appointed, as including the Attorney General, can defy the Congress making inquiries, are we headed into a constitutional crisis where the executive branch feels that they do not have to answer or be held accountable to the legislative branch?
That is what is at stake. Congressman Kildee speaks for the resolve of the entire Democratic caucus. We're not going to roll over. We're going to do our constitutional duty. If this heads to the courts, I am confident that they will rule for Congress. The reality is every previous administration has complied with these requests. I mean, Hillary Clinton was in front of the Benghazi committee when they had the bogus things against Obama on Solyndra or on the IRS. He still produced documents. He still appeared. It's unprecedented, and we have a lot of things we can do. We can hold folks in contempt. We can actually have the sergeant of arms go after someone, as Sam Erwin did in Watergate, to get them to testify. And ultimately, we have the courts who will resolve this in our favor.
Now, I want you to listen, both of you, to former Acting Attorney General Sally Yates and what she said this morning on Meet the Press.
For nearly 30 years, and I can tell you I've personally prosecuted obstruction cases on far, far less evidence than this. And yes, I believe if he were not the President of the United States, he would likely be indicted on obstruction.
Congressman Kildee, she said that if he were not president, she feels he would be indicted for obstruction. She's gone forward as a prosecutor with less evidence. And we are talking about obstructing justice in inquiring on whether a foreign adversarial government interfered with an American election. I mean, we're talking about the basics of what this country was founded on, at least in writing, and we're acting as if this is just some civil case.
Well, it's certainly not. This is an extraordinary set of circumstances, and I've been going through the Mueller report line by line, reading every piece of it, and what Sally Yates has to say aligns with what I see. Of course, it is a harsh contradiction to what Mr. Barr tried to do, and that is characterize the report essentially as an exoneration. Not only is it not an exoneration, the Mueller report makes it clear that this is not an exoneration. Not only has he not been cleared of obstruction of justice, Mr. Mueller says that the obstruction evidence is now being submitted to Congress, and rather than making a traditional charging decision, it is up to Congress to now to analyze this information and make what will be obviously a very tough decision in terms of how we go forward. But look, this is by no means an exoneration. This is a practical indictment of the President of the United States for, as she said, for activity that otherwise would be considered criminal.
And Congressman Khanna, clearly it is said in plain language, and this is with the redacted Mueller report that we've seen, that this is not an exoneration. And it says there was no evidence of collusion, but we cannot say that the president is exonerated of obstruction. And one could even suggest if there had not been obstruction, we don't know what evidence they may have uncovered that could have even led further to collusion. We just don't know what we don't know.
Reverend Sharpton, you're right. And what should concern every American is you have the President of the United States basically ordering his subordinates to do illegal things. Now, he's fortunate in some sense that they defied him and Don McGahn didn't fire Mueller, but you have Donald Trump sitting there plotting, even going to Corey Ladowski, his former campaign aide, basically asking his aides to subvert democracy and do things that were illegal. The challenge, I think, for the House is we need to bring this to life for the American people. We need to do our job. We need to have people testify. Ultimately, public sentiment is everything, and we need to make the case to the American people why this is such a violation of our basic democracy.
Congressman Kildee, the argument that we're told between the Attorney General Barr and the head of the House Judiciary Committee, Congressman Nadler, is the way that the testimony would go down in terms of how many minutes, who would question, how it would question. You're on Ways and Means. Have you ever seen the kind of back and forward and threatening that I will not show up if the actual format is not to the liking of the witness?
Yeah, this just goes, I think, to the heart of the problem. President Trump and the people around him think they get to dictate the terms of everything. And as Congressman Khanna pointed out, sometimes people have to testify when it's uncomfortable. He pointed out that Secretary Clinton sat for hours and took questions and answered those questions. Look, the American people want to know the truth. Congress will obviously have some decisions to make when the facts all come to light. But the most important principle at stake here is that people understand what is going on in their government. And the fact that this president ordered people around him who work for him to break the law, and then to have Attorney General Barr try to paper that over as if it was some sort of a traffic ticket. He has some questions to answer, and he has to answer those questions from the people's representatives, and they don't get to decide what kind of questions and in what form those questions are answered. This is the Constitution at play. This is the Constitution at work. This is not some meeting of the board of directors of the condo association at Mar-a-Lago. They have to answer these questions. It's
Congressman
the people's
Khanna,
business.
when you look at the 4-page summation that the Attorney General released, and then you look at the redacted report that later came out, is it clear to you that there is a clear gap between what he said and what the report said, and we haven't even seen the full report? And is that, in your opinion, one of the critical things that he should be questioned about this week?
Well, Reverend Sharpton, I think you're being diplomatic by calling it a gap. I would go further and say it was blatant misrepresentation. And if I were Barr, I'd be very concerned about appearing before the House Judiciary Committee as well. I mean, he risks perjuring himself. He's going to have to explain why he wouldn't allow the full report to come out. He's going to have to explain why he has these misrepresentations. And he's not Donald Trump. I mean, he doesn't have millions of followers. And what we've seen is the collateral damage in the Trump administration is often the subordinates are the ones who get in trouble. And that's, I think, why Barr is so hesitant to come before this committee.
All right. Let me thank you both, Congressman Kildee and Congressman Khanna. As you can see.